email us, or connect with us on social media.
Your mother warned me last night.
Dad, you know Mom's not here.
What's the matter? They take away your wings?
You think you can do and say whatever you want?
You know where the door is, my friend.
I'm trying to save the one person left in my life that matters to me.
I can't help you. What you're talking about is illegal.
Sometimes we have to do things we don't want to survive.
This is Rogers TV.
Hello and welcome to the special edition COVID-19 Rogers TV program. I'm Carol Merton, and before I welcome our guest, I want to share a few thoughts with you. On Thursday, January 14th, 2021, as part of the declaration of the second provincial emergency, a stay-at-home order was issued. This order and other new and existing public health restrictions are aimed at limiting people's mobility and reducing the number of daily contacts with those outside an immediate household. We are all now on the front line. We are all working together to stop this virus and the variants that are spreading. This virus will seek every opportunity it can to spread by finding loopholes. Let's not give it any. This is hard work for all of us. It is hard to be isolated and have our daily routines disrupted. We are all weary. Essential workers in healthcare, long-term care and retirement homes, public health, first responders, pharmacies, our local businesses, and so many other support service agencies, they need our support now more than ever as we move through this time together. On the horizon, there is hope that the future vaccine availability will allow us to move through the various levels of priority, and all who choose to be vaccinated will be able to receive it. Never underestimate the value and importance of what we are doing by following the Public Health Unit guidelines. The sacrifices that we are making each and every day are helping to prevent the spread of COVID-19. We are saving lives. So thank you to all in our community who are working hard to stop the spread of COVID-19. And also thank you to our first guest who's here to talk to us about senior abuse prevention. John Farmer is joining us today. John, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me back.
And I know that I will try and get your title correct, but you tell me if I get it wrong. So I have you as the coordinator of the Violence Prevention Program in Grey Bruce, right?
So today I'm here representing Grey Bruce Elder Abuse Prevention.
Okay, all right. And that's what I wanted to clarify, just to make sure I've got it right here. So I know you've got lots of information to share, but my first question to you is, why this initiative? And what did COVID-19 do around this whole issue? So I'll pass it over to you.
So Grey Bruce Elder Abuse Prevention is a rebranding of the Senior Safety Network, which since 2017 has been a subcommittee of Violence Prevention Grey Bruce, specifically dedicated to raising awareness about elder abuse or senior abuse. We'll use those two terms interchangeably. It's the abuse of older adults in Grey and Bruce counties. We believe, as we do with all of our violence prevention activities, that the more the people understand about these issues, the better able they are to recognize them and to ultimately prevent and if we can't prevent, then to respond to violence when it happens. And seniors are particularly vulnerable for a number of reasons, and many of which we probably don't need to explain, but we'll say them anyway, right? Like that for seniors who depend on other people for parts of their caregiving, for parts of their daily routines, whether that's transportation, social connection, rides, physical support, whether that's in the home or outside of the home. And in so many ways, seniors can be vulnerable to be taken advantage of or to be harmed by people in their lives, whether those are caregivers or whether those are friends or family members.
So this is a network of organizations working together, correct?
Yes.
So who's involved in this network?
Lately we have representation from Sheater, from the CHC down in Markdale. I always forget what CHC stands for. From the social service supports up at Nea-Shingaming, and as well as input from a community member who works with Beaver Valley Outreach as well, and some of their programming.
Where does the funding come from? Because I know you have, and you probably will be talking about some of the handout information that you have, some of the resources and the tools that you're using. Where does the funding come from for this?
Well, the current project that I'll be talking about today, which is a poster resource and series of presentations that we've been able to create, that funding is coming from the Community Foundation of Grey Bruce. This committee is just a voluntary committee, so there's no base funding to begin with, and we do fundraising and grant writing to support specific projects. And the Community Foundation was good enough last year to award us funds to create a poster that in one place connects resources for adults, older adults and seniors who may be experiencing violence, all in one place, as well as to do some public speaking and awareness raising about that in local media like we are right now, as well as through specific outreach events. We had originally planned to do that in person, which tells you how long ago we wrote that grant, but that's not possible right now. So instead, we're offering virtual or phone-in community awareness raising sessions. There will be one on February the 11th and one on March the 11th, where our partner from Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, which is the provincial organization that addresses elder abuse in Ontario, will be on to talk to us about what the issue is, and where we'll also be talking more about these resources. And I held up one poster, but we did a nice and big one as well. This is 11 by 17. We have one that is 8.5 by 11. And the font is nice and big, recognizing that the people we want to read this might not have the perfect vision. So we wanted that to be accessible.
So you mentioned that there's going to be on February the 11th, I think was the first date that you mentioned. How can people plug into that kind of initiative then?
So to register, so we're going to be hosting it using the platform Zoom, which will allow us to have people participating like you and I are speaking right now through a video call. Mm-hmm. But we also know that not everyone is comfortable with this technology or has access to it. So there will also be a call-in phone number so that people can just participate on the phone if they'd like to. You can register for that by visiting violencepreventiongraybruce.com and finding there's a link right at the top of the page to the site where you can register, which is we're using a platform called Eventbrite. So you'll sign up for whichever one you like, and then in the days leading up, we will either email or call out with the information to log in, and you'll show up at the time of the presentation to watch it.
Yeah, and no charge for people to register.
This is all totally free and made possible thanks to that grant funding from the Community Foundation of Grey Bruce.
Yeah. Excellent. So where would you like to take us first around the actual initiative?
Well, I think that we should talk generally about what elder abuse is. There are many different types of elder abuse, and we often can think of violence as just being physical violence. But elder abuse can include, yes, physical violence, physical abuse. It can include sexual abuse, financial abuse, neglect, or mental abuse. And any of those things that inspire fear or exploit an older adult counts as elder abuse. In some cases, that might be abuse from a caregiver. In some cases, that might be from a family member or a friend, or a scam from someone who has just connected with that senior. We know that telephone scams are always a risk, and I'm sure that you've spoken with local police services about fraud and scams previously. So all of those things would fall under that. It might look like abusing power of attorney to gain access to resources. It might look, it can take so many different forms, but we recognize it by the power dynamic and by the harm that it's causing to that older adult. So you might recognize changes in someone's appearance if they're appearing in the same clothing or soiled clothing, if bills are not being paid, if there's no food in the place, if they seem like they have injuries or there are changes in their social activities. That's a harder sign to recognize during a pandemic, mind you. But if there are people who are normally outgoing and present and you're recognizing that they seem fearful or that they're worried, those are all signs that someone might be experiencing violence. We can also recognize violence, though, by the actions of the person who may be the abuser. So if we notice someone using threats, controlling behavior, blaming that elderly person, name calling, neglecting them. So if you notice that there's someone who's supposed to be dropping off groceries, but they're not there, or someone says that maybe that their son demanded $200 extra to drop off the groceries this week. There are all sorts of signs and symptoms that we can look for in the actions of the person at risk, but also in the actions of the potential abuser.
We know in Grey Bruce that our population numbers we do have more seniors compared to other areas. Does that translate into more, that our statistics are higher for this type of abuse, or is there a correlation between the numbers and what the actual situation?
I'll be totally honest and say that we don't have Grey and Bruce numbers for elder abuse specifically. It take a lot to drill down in there because the specific crimes that fall under elder abuse would be labeled as those crimes by police services. So if it's a scam, it would be recorded as a scam, or assault would be recorded as an assault, things like that. And it would take a lot for us to drill down into local data to get those demographics. So full disclosure, I don't have those numbers for Grey Bruce, but we do know that when there's are more vulnerable people, that there's no reason to think that the proportional rates of people experiencing elder abuse would become lower if we have more seniors in our area. There's also always a risk around the financial component or power of attorney component with elder abuse when there are estates that have large numbers of assets involved, and different people who want that money. So we've certainly heard stories over the years about, for instance, farm families where a well-run farm can be worth millions of dollars, and there can be pressure on the part of people who might have interests in that estate to pressure that older adult to do certain things with their money or name certain people to positions of power of attorney or otherwise.
So in COVID-19, some of these things, as you mentioned, would not be as obvious. So the isolation is a risk factor for seniors right now. I mean, it's a challenge for all of us, but especially for those who are more vulnerable, correct?
Absolutely. Isolation is always a risk factor for abuse, whether we're talking about elder abuse, domestic violence, any of those things. For a number of reasons, it means that if someone is isolated on their own, that they may be lonely and so more looking for kind of social connections and so more able to be manipulated. It can also look like more concentrated time with an abuser, or we know that social activity is really good for maintaining cognitive health, and that for seniors who may be experiencing cognitive declines, that isolation and the inability to connect with the activities that would normally keep them engaged and help to protect against further cognitive decline, without those supports, with neglect and isolation, some forms of dementia can be expedited.
Yeah.
So for
Yeah.
all of those reasons, elder abuse can go up during periods of isolation. But there's also, with any kind of abuse, when people are isolated, they don't have the access to the other people who would normally be there to say, like, Nancy shouldn't have that bruise. Like, this isn't right. Or Fred is normally really well dressed, but lately he has not been as put together. Or any of the other millions of examples that we could give for what would trigger people to recognize that something is wrong. So if people don't have access to day away programs or church or the other regular social activities, it becomes harder for their neighbors, friends, or family to notice those signs and symptoms and to support them.
So I'm going to give you a brief scenario, and maybe you could advise. So if I was a neighbor and I don't see Edna, I'll just pick a name. And normally we have a chat or, whatever, but I don't see her because we have to keep distance because of COVID. But Edna calls me and she says, my son is doing, or my daughter, or whatever, and I don't know, what is my obligation or my responsibility as someone who cares for a neighbor in a community? What should I do if I know that there's something not right? I don't see it, I'm not there, but I've been told about it because the neighbor is calling, and she says, but don't say anything. I don't want to make trouble in my family. I just want you to listen. What does a person do in that situation? Because it's a concern, and we all have to help each other in a community.
Yeah, certainly. And that's a hard situation. I think that for our friend Edna there, she's reaching out because she knows that something's wrong. And that as a friend, the first thing to do is just what you said, to be patient and to listen. And to let her know if something doesn't sound right, if someone has been threatening, if she's been neglected, if money is going missing and she's worried about that, listening and letting her know that gut reaction that made her reach out is something that she should listen to. There are also other resources that we as a community need to be aware of to know that we can reach out to. One of the best is the Senior Safety Line. And it is available to anyone in Ontario. I believe at last count, they could offer service in more than 150 languages. And it is a number that people can call into if they think that they or someone they know are experiencing elder abuse. Again, that's called the Senior Safety Line. It's the second number on our poster here, right under 911. It's run by Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, and that Senior Safety Line has seen a 300% increase in calls during the pandemic. And
did you say 300%?
300%, yeah. So they're getting more calls, right? Because people are in vulnerable situations. They don't necessarily know what to do, and it's a really great resource. It's not the kind of resource where they're clocking you at 5 minutes and after that time they're going to kick you off. They're on the phone with people for up to, the last I was told, 45 minutes was not uncommon, because it can take time to explain a situation. It can take time to find the right words. And knowing even just about the Senior Safety Line, as Edna's friend and neighbor, you can call them yourself and explain the situation and ask what to do. You can encourage Edna to call the Senior Safety Line to find out more about her rights and about what's going on.
I think your comment just a little bit earlier in the program, you said, if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. And to be able to support the person if they say, to say, well, if it doesn't feel right, perhaps make this call and run it by someone who might be able to advise you. And that's where the call to the safety line would be helpful. That is, not all of us are trained in understanding or knowing the depth of what would or wouldn't be violence. But if it doesn't feel right, it's probably worth investigating further.
Absolutely.
The one thing I've also heard is that financial institutions take a significant role in monitoring for seniors' abuse. And you mentioned earlier about financial abuse. What's your understanding about how they monitor. I know sometimes I've been told they just watch transactions, and they're just, I would think that's another safety net for people.
Well, absolutely. And anyone that interacts with an older adult has that role. Banks are in the position of, especially for people who have long-standing relationships with their banking institutions, if you know that Edna always comes in and has certain habits, and you're the teller who can see the history of her withdrawals, if there are changes there, things that don't seem right, tellers are in a great position to intervene, and to even just ask questions like, if Edna takes out $200 every 2 weeks, and suddenly there's $3,000 that's missing. Tellers are in a position to ask questions about that. I can't speak personally to the training that different financial institutions provide, but tellers are someone who's in that position. But any frontline service work, right? Like home care providers, the people at grocery stores, anyone who interacts with and is part of the community providing service to older adults need to be aware that elder abuse is a possibility and that it's a reality, even in Grey and Bruce counties. I use the term neighbors, friends, and families, and beyond that, anyone in the community, right? If we see something that doesn't look right, whether you're at the park and someone's yelling at an older adult and using berating names or threatening them, that should be a red flag for us. And it's not good enough to say, well, that's their business and not my business, because we all have a role to play in keeping people safe in our community.
And that's an important framework, that we're all responsible for keeping our seniors safe, because people may be a little bit hesitant to intervene. But you're saying, please take the time to speak or find out more about seniors' abuse.
Yeah. And really, we could say that about any form of abuse. The local organization Sheater, put out a podcast version of their play, You Canna Throw Your Granny Off the Bus, as an educational tool about elder abuse. I highly recommend people find that podcast. You can go to sheater.com. We've got links to it from Violence Prevention's website under our elder abuse initiative. And it runs through a number of scenarios to help people feel more confident. It's also important for us to recognize that people who are experiencing violence can be hesitant to reach out about that because of shame, because of stigma surrounding it. If the person abusing them is a family member, there can be fear about reporting something that would have legal consequences for someone that you love, even if they're abusing you. It's messy, it's complicated, and we need to have compassion and care as a first step in responding to any of these issues.
Certainly, to support our more vulnerable populations, I think COVID-19 has truly put the spotlight on how important it is as a community that we reach out and support seniors and vulnerable people as well.
I would like to say, Carol, that it's important for us to remember, too, that it's not only frail seniors or seniors who may be experiencing cognitive decline who are at risk of violence or abuse. It's literally anyone.
Yeah, and that's an important point, that although our focus is about, the seniors prevention, violence prevention awareness, it's across all spectrums, all ages that this can occur. And a lot of the strategies are important. Be aware, speak up, make the connection, and support the individual, right? So what else is on your poster around who do I call? I've got a very small little image, and I'm going, okay, I'll have to put on my glasses.
Well, we have, the first number is 911. Okay. If someone is in immediate danger or experiencing violence right away, we recommend that they call 911. We also have the senior safety line. We have victim services of Bruce Grey Perth. We have 211, which is a great resource that can help to network you to other services and supports. If someone is female, they can reach out to the Women's Center or a Women's House serving Bruce Grey. There's the Southeast Grey Community Health Clinic, which we mentioned. There's Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario for more information. The Grey Bruce Community Legal Clinic clinic can provide some legal support and help to connect people. There's the Advocacy Center for the Elderly that has more information. There's the Victim Information Support Line through the Government of Ontario. There's YMCA housing services if housing is an issue. For Indigenous members of our community, the Mawikwadong Indigenous Friendship Center can provide some support. There's a line, a provincial line specifically for Indigenous people called Hope for Wellness. There's also the Métis Nation of Ontario and Quebecioin, which is the shelter at Saugeen. So those are all the folks on our poster. And if anyone wants to request a poster, those posters are also free. And you can find out more information about how to request one by visiting violencepreventiongraybruce.com and sending us an email.
And I know the poster is really clearly laid out, like just the way it's designed is very, very easy to follow. So we go back to neighbors, friends, and family members. What can they do to help? And I really like how you've identified, see it, name it, check it. And I think, that really puts it in very succinct form. But what happens if you've listened to someone and, they don't take your advice? What would you suggest? Just keep listening?
Yeah, well, we need to respect their decisions, even if we don't agree with them. And we need to stay as supports and be there. Because when they come to a point where they recognize that they need support, if we've thrown our hands up and walked away to say, well, Edna didn't listen to me, so she deserves what she gets, that's just not an appropriate response, right? That's not compassionate. It doesn't recognize that we do all get to make our own choices, and that if people need more support with that, then we've got to stay in their corner.
Yeah. And sometimes people have the right to choose, even if they're living at risk. That is their right to make that choice. But a person could talk to them about a safety plan, correct?
Absolutely.
And maybe you could talk a little bit. I know our show we're running down in time, but what's a safety plan, John?
So a safety plan is what it sounds like. It's a plan to support someone's safety. So if they're living with an abuser, the safety plan might include laying out the steps that they would need to take to leave safely, or that if the abuse escalates, that they know that they've got all their important information in one bag by the door, that they're going to leave, that they know what friend or family member they're going to go talk to, or the safe place where they can go if home is not safe. There might be, as part of a safety plan, really clearly identifying who the supports are in your life. So you might, Edna might not be ready to change her situation, but if you make a plan with her to say, if things get worse, you can always call me, and here's my number, then that's a really tiny safety plan. And it's laying out the steps that someone who's experiencing abuse would need to take in order to stay safe and protect their own safety by collecting their resources and knowing who's on their team and who to call and what steps to take to protect their own safety.
And that in itself is something that as a community we can do for those who are at risk. John, I want to thank you so much for being on the program. I always enjoy speaking with you. You have so much information. Please join us again to tell us more about the programs that you offer. Thank you for having me. And please, for anyone watching, join us on the 11th of February or the 11th of March for more information about elder abuse. Thank you. And thank you to our viewing audience. Please join us again to learn more about resources, services, and programs available to you and to your family. Please take care and stay safe. Thank you.